Probably my most controversial opinion is I'm like, that's bullshit. And if you're saying that, you're a problem. Welcome to this week's episode of the Uncovery podcast. My name is Maddie and I'm recovering from anorexia and I talk about it on this podcast. So before we jump into this week's episode, just a reminder that it is a part 2. So last week was episode 43. And if you haven't listened to that one, that's the first half of this episode. It was just such a long and wonderful conversation that we split it into 2 parts. So go back and listen to episode 43. This week we get into even deeper and hotter water topics. So yeah, get ready to form your own opinions, hopefully, about any of the controversial or unpopular things that we're saying, or maybe they're not that controversial and we just have been afraid to say them. I don't know. It's almost Christmas. We are just a few days away, and I know how difficult this time of year can be for people that struggle with food or struggle with their bodies or struggle with communication or family or stress or a myriad of other things. It's a wonderful time of year, but it's also sometimes a really difficult time of year for people. And I think that, I don't know, everything that's going on in the world leads me to believe that it's probably a particularly stressful year for some people. So just know that however it is that you are getting through it or enjoying it is totally valid. If you are worried about food, I get it. I've been there. I'm still there. I still have, an appointment with my dietitian on the 23rd of December just to have a little check-in and get myself pumped up for the next week or so, because it's particularly challenging to be surrounded by food at every turn when you are recovering from an eating disorder or have struggled with food in the past. So I get it. And I also just want to remind you, in case you've forgotten, that you have unconditional permission to enjoy food. That's it. That's the whole that's the whole lesson. You have unconditional permission. Nothing is going to happen. It's going to be totally fine. I'm saying this as much for my benefit as I am for yours, but I think if we can move into the season with that mindset, we might have a really glorious time. So yeah, that's all that I really wanted to say. I hope you have a really beautiful Christmas, however it is that you're spending it. And eat lots of cookies if that's what you want to do. I'm going to be eating cookies. I've been eating cookies and chocolate almost daily. My eating disorder is furious. So that means I'm doing something right. According to Sophie, which you'll hear in this episode. So with that perfect segue, the other half of our Unpopular Opinions episode. And the degree of honesty and the ability to even to have, like, especially if you're in therapy, to be able to reflect with somebody else and to be like, okay, like, let's get to the bottom of the real reason that you're doing this. I think then it's totally possible.
Yes.
In the same way that, quote unquote, and I don't like the sort of quote unquote healthy food versus unhealthy food, right? Mm-hmm. It's almost impossible to talk about food without having labels on it like that. Food is just food and it gives you energy. There are more nutrient dense foods. Can you have a relationship with food where you still have foods that make you feel good, genuinely feel better, and maybe they look like healthy foods that you also happen to enjoy when you were in your eating disorder, but now you're not eating them because you're trying to change your body?
Yeah, absolutely. And you will find that you are drawn towards those foods because your body craves it, and it's not a cognitive thing necessarily. You're not thinking like, oh, I want to order this at the restaurant because, it's the most conducive to being restrictive.
Right.
You know, like it's not going to be those thoughts. It's like, oh, I haven't eaten vegetables in a while. I am kind of feeling that
I've
right
got a
now.
hankering for a broccoli.
And you and you actually do start to feel that way, and it's not this rigidity anymore. It's just free flowing, and it's like, oh, I like a salad just sounds good.
It just sounds good.
Yeah.
And it's a totally innocuous, there's no little nasty eating disorder controlling you. That's like the pinnacle of intuitive eating, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Or it's also just, you know, eating some fun foods and then realizing like, oh, I've had enough. This was good, but it's okay. I can stop now and maybe eat it again tomorrow, maybe not. Who knows?
Because I'm still allowed to tomorrow, right?
Absolutely.
In an unprecedented existence, I can have this whenever I want for the rest of my life forever.
Yes.
It's always going to be there. So I don't have to feel this intense anxiety at any time that I'm having a meal. Like, when would I ever have this again? It's like, well, whenever you want.
Whenever you want to. Absolutely. Can we talk about, because intuitive eating kind of reminds me of this other point, and let's talk about body positivity, intuitive eating, and other things found in the social media space when it comes to eating disorders and recovery. Because I don't know about you, but I follow a lot of psychology accounts and eating disorder type of accounts. And there is, like, we are inundated by all of these viewpoints and all of these like the body positivity movement and all of these things that we should be doing in order to get to recovery. And I don't think that is always helpful for people. Unpopular opinion, I don't think that all of those voices are necessarily helpful. And let's start off with body positivity. So for me, I fundamentally disagree with body positivity because the goal shouldn't be to feel perfectly content with our bodies at all times. The goal in recovery is to actually not be thinking about it in the first place. You know, like the goal of recovery is to create space, because the eating disorder takes up so much space. Create space by actually not really thinking about it too much. And to me, body positivity is kind of like, I do understand the drive for it, and I do acknowledge that it's something that is helpful and positive, but on the flip side, like it's still preoccupation with your body, and it's still like, not like, what does it do? You know, like it's still preoccupation, and you don't have to love your body. Your body houses your soul, and get on with other things.
That's how
right?
That's how I feel about it too. And I struggle because I see the benefits in what it has brought to a conversation about needing to see a variety of different kinds of bodies. So the body positivity movement has shown us more of a variety of bodies that then you think, oh my God, okay. So when I look at media, it isn't all models and Instagram models and filters and whatever. There are actually more real people that just look normal.
Yeah.
And that's great.
That's amazing. I agree with you. That's important.
But the idea that we're going to be super excited about our bodies, and that if we're not, that we're somehow offensive for not liking our bodies, that's where I struggle.
That's such a good point.
That's where I struggle, is my dysmorphia, my body dysmorphia, and the way that I feel about my body is not any reflection on how I view other people and their bodies.
Oh, that is such a big misconception from other people about eating disorders,
yes.
Right?
And I have seen this on social media on accounts that I really religiously followed and really appreciated the content of. And this is a nice, right? Like, you're never going to agree with everything somebody says or does. But I think it's so hurtful for someone to say, if you have a problem with your body, then you are insulting anybody that has a body that's like yours or that's bigger or whatever. It's like, it has absolutely nothing to do with that.
Yeah.
I am not in any way sitting in judgment of someone else's body because of my own body dysmorphia. I think that's a really, really gross way to approach people that are struggling with eating disorders, is to be like, how dare you be struggling? How dare you be struggling? because you're invalidating everybody
Exactly.
else with your struggles.
And if you feel that way about yourself, you must really think that, I'm a whale, right?
I had a friend when I was younger, when I was first kind of doing this nonsense with eating. It was still at the point where I was kind of like complaining that I felt fat or that whatever it was.
Mm-hmm.
And my friend was like, well, if you feel that way about you, what must that say about how you feel about me? And I was like gobsmacked, because I was like, I don't even think about the way you look, like, which is another one, right? Like, nobody's thinking about the way you look as much as you are.
And because you're so self-absorbed with, and not in like a selfish, shitty way, but just like in a very realistic way. When you have an eating disorder, you're so self-absorbed in your own mental anguish that you are generally not projecting that judgment onto other people. You are solely self-destructive. This is not like an outward, I need everybody to have an eating disorder and be skinny because I judge all of your bodies. Like, I think that's so toxic. And I think it would really hamper people from being honest about what they're struggling with and getting help. If you're completely invalidating that anybody that's struggling with their body is just judgmental and fat phobic, I think that's fucking ridiculous. No, that is just
that's
not
that's probably my most controversial opinion, is I'm like, that's bullshit. And if you're saying that, you're a problem. You don't understand body dysmorphia. You actually don't understand eating disorders, if that's your mindset.
Absolutely. And just think about how much that adds to the shame of having an eating disorder in the first place.
Right.
Like and that shame, like the shame is what really hinders recovery.
Yeah.
And it's feeling bad about yourself, even within the context of getting better. And what you just described would certainly not help with getting rid of that shame.
Yeah.
So yes, very, very damaging.
Yeah.
For sure. So with body positivity and how we are constantly inundated with it on social media, is it practical? Is body positivity practical? I think that there's just that you can veer off halfway through your climb to body positivity, and there's body neutrality, and within that is just getting on with your life, and I think that is much more practical and much more helpful than body positivity, because for me, I feel positive about my body every single day? Absolutely not. However, is it something do I sit there and lament of I don't love my body? No, because that's not necessarily what recovery has to be. It's okay, well, I feel bloated today. What am I going to do about it? I'm just going to, move on with other things.
And then just hope for the best and know that it will pass, that this too shall pass.
Yeah. Recovery is just like a shrinking of these things that used to take up a whole bunch of space in your mind. They shrink down. And do they disappear? A lot of it does disappear, but some of it stays, and for me, recovery is just being able to tune into a different radio channel frequency. You know what I mean? Like when you're listening to the radio and you can tune in to this frequency, and it might be a disordered thought. It's okay, ooh, that's disordered. Let's tune into a different, healthier frequency and just switch radio stations.
Yeah, I hear this radio station. I see this eating disorder thought. I'm like, okay, I hear you. Let's try a different one, and then try to move on from it and to not engage and get enveloped in it.
And sometimes, some days you're stuck in that frequency. Maybe it's a really bad day and you're stuck in that disordered, on that disordered radio station. Turn down the volume. Right.
Yeah. Use the other dials. Do whatever you can. Yes. Turn something else on. Put on a white noise machine. Do something else to sort of to tune that out.
Yeah.
I think my hope, what I like to imagine body positivity influencers are actually doing in their lives is being more or less neutral or not caring so much. Yeah. That in their day-to-day, that they're not just obsessed with their bodies one way or the other, that they're actually sort of traversing this side exit neutral space instead of just shooting to the moon and being like, I'm positive about this all of the time. If the performance of body positivity is only in fact to just show that there are different bodies and that they can be celebrated, if that's the goal, fine. But if we're inundated with this stuff to the point that we're like, well, if I never get there, did I really recover, or am I fat phobic?
Right.
Then not helpful.
No.
Super not helpful.
Not helpful at all. And I feel like, and this might be controversial to say, especially when it comes to eating disorders, the goal should be health. You know, so sure, be body positive, but at the end of the day, how are we moving towards health so that we can be our most optimal selves in the, 90 years that we're given in this dimension? And so I feel like there's this departure from what health actually is. And so there's physical health, of course, there's emotional health, spiritual, like it has all of these pillars. And I don't think it should be controversial to keep health in mind.
Yeah.
Right. And to have that as the goal, because when you're recovering from an eating disorder, health is the goal, and it should be the goal for everybody. And so these things that can be like, maybe shaky territory for people who have had eating disorders, such as exercise and all of those other topics, like if we can get to a space where we can incorporate these things that were once issues for us in a disordered sense, if we can incorporate these things to reach optimal health, like that should not be demonized. Like we can find balance when it comes to those things. And everybody should just be moving further towards health. And also we need to be practical and remain grounded in what makes health. And we can't find ourselves in this departure from reality in favor of emotion. Right?
Yes, I agree. I totally agree. I want to at least be able to have the conversation about what that means. And I think that this is why this is so contentious, is the definition of health has been completely bastardized.
Yeah.
Right? When you have an eating disorder, health includes freedom. Mm-hmm. Freedom from thoughts, freedom from the restriction of what it is that you eat. And as you then move further and further out of it, it's just sort of this holistic picture of what you are. Mm-hmm. But the way that different people define health, I think, is the problem. And people that, let's say, have had eating disorders, and then the word health, it becomes very, to not use this word because this will be my next topic, triggered by the word health, right? Because we've not all been there. Many of us have been there where someone says, you look so healthy when you're in recovery, and your hands are just clutching the table and you're like, oh my God, I'm gonna die, because all you can hear is you've gained a lot of weight, right? Or whatever.
As soon as you said that, I had immediate flashbacks of what that felt like when people made those comments in recovery. It is so very difficult to sit and to like smile through those conversations. It's not so bad for me anymore, because now I have the cognition to separate that and be like, that's a good thing, that's a good thing, that's a good thing, that's a good thing, that's the goal, that's the goal, that's the goal. Because now that I actually want to recover, whereas before I was sort of fighting things tooth and nail, now that I actually want to get to the other side, I'm like, oh good, these are indications. It means you're getting closer to your goal. This is perfect. Great, great, great. But still in your mind, you're like, you're looking really healthy. And you're like, thank you. Exactly.
Thank you so much.
And then again, it's that divide of being like, this is a good thing, but it also still feels bad.
Yes.
And just sitting within that division is so uncomfortable.
It's so uncomfortable. Yeah. But yeah, so to get back to sort of the people that are triggered by, well, is this actually healthy? I want to at least be able to have the conversation. I want to feel like no matter who you are, you're allowed to have a voice in the recovery community, and that you're able to talk about these topics without fear. Because if you're not being cruel and you're genuinely like, let's just talk about this, why shouldn't you be able to have a voice at the table? There probably aren't enough of them.
Yeah, there are nowhere even close to enough voices. And so if you have lived experience, if you've come out the other side of this, you are a superhuman, and you have a voice, and you are absolutely needed.
Right. Maybe this sort of dovetails with something else that I think we might want to talk about, which is this idea of privilege within recovery.
Mm-hmm.
I struggle with this word.
Right.
I think it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people.
And especially
I think,
now.
especially now. But that if you've had the privilege of going into recovery, or the privilege to be recovering into a body that is, let's say, of a certain size,
Right.
that you should be quiet, because the voices that matter are people that don't fall within that paradigm.
Fundamentally disagree.
Completely. I
Disagree so hard.
So fucking hard. I disagree. And tell me your thoughts.
Well, I am I'm very much a person who is really fascinated and driven by the individual experiences of others. I love stories. I love hearing other people's stories. And I think that's what's important. And the details to be found within these individual stories creates connection, like a constellation, like a connect the dots. And so it doesn't matter who you are. And yes, there is such thing as the privilege to get treatment, right? Like the financial resources in order to access treatment. But it doesn't change the fact that you have done the work of restructuring your neural pathways in order to get better, right? And so if we start silencing voices, or if we start silencing ourselves because we feel like we have had an advantage in getting better, and sure, maybe we have had some advantage in getting better. If we silence ourselves because of that, we're doing a disservice to the world, right? Because those privileges, they don't take away from the individual factors that connect everyone together, and we can speak to those individual points. And if we silence ourselves, like how are we going to spread that hope? How are we going to connect with what binds us all together as a whole? And yeah, like I think it's very important. For example, so I have never had the experience of being fat. I've never existed in a bigger body. And I realize that puts some limitations on me when it comes to truly being able to empathize from a lived experience perspective with somebody who is in a bigger body with an eating disorder, or somebody who has recovered into a much bigger body, right? So I acknowledge that, but at the same time, I still have a lot of empathy and a lot of insight into other aspects of someone else's experience, right? So it's being honest with yourself, but then it's also still just acknowledging that you don't have to be ashamed because of these things, like these certain privileges. Yeah. Right? And do not silence yourself. Like, absolutely not.
And that to me that's the whole point of all of this, is that no matter who you are, I would encourage anybody that's going through this to be more vocal. Now, if you happen to create or have a platform from which you feel comfortable speaking about your experience, this is not a zero-sum game. Me using my voice to talk about my experience in no way means that you don't get to, that Sophie couldn't talk about her experience because Maddie already took that spot. Everybody should be able to share.
Yeah.
And there's nothing to be gained by silencing some people. It's up to us to highlight the diversity within eating disorders and within the eating disorder recovery community, whether or not we're considered a minority in that population or not. Right? So just because you happen to fit some kind of stereotypical journey of an eating disorder, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't be speaking about it.
Right. And bringing others along with you and being vulnerable publicly, which will also encourage others to be more vulnerable and open. Right. Yeah. Like it like being privileged in certain ways does not disqualify everything else that you have to offer, and all of the ways in which you can promote the voices of other people. Yeah. Right? Like, because if we choose not to speak because we have the privilege of being white women within the eating disorder space, if we choose not to speak our truth, then who's to say that that's not doing a disservice by, you know, preventing other people from having that permission to be like, okay, well, they're speaking about this, I can also speak about this. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like,
and it comes back, I think, also to that shame piece,
Yeah.
where if you start to demonize people for just happening to be the way that they are and having the experience that they've had, and that they should be quiet about their recovery, I'm like, fuck that.
Yeah.
Like,
recover, we need all
like
the voices.
Well, yeah, I mean, recover loudly is the like tagline that I came up with now for this podcast, right? Because why the hell would you recover quietly if you feel like you could do it loudly, right?
Yeah.
And there are so few people that will do it, that will talk about it, because so many people just kind of want to get on with their lives, or they don't feel like it was a big enough deal, or they really just don't want to share what they went through. And that's okay.
That's totally fair.
But there have to be enough people that are willing to recover loudly so that people know that they can recover at all.
Absolutely. If you have the drive and the passion and the empathy and the pull towards sharing your story and sharing your experience with somebody who is just waiting to be given permission to also feel like they can as well, that absolutely we have to do that.
You have to.
So this thought of people staying silent, or, you know, not adding their voice to the pool of voices just because they feel like they are not who should be represented because of privilege. Like, no, don't stop doing that. Stop doing that.
Stop stopping.
Stop stopping. Please.
Yeah.
There are so many people who you could reach, and on an individual level, like, for me, it's all about the individual and connecting it to these things that make us all human. And that's why where we're at right now with identifying a certain way, and there's all of these identity politics, and that perturbs me, because what happens to the individual connection of us as humans? And yes, privilege exists, and, you know, it's been an issue for sure. I'm not denying that, but how do we move forward? And the same goes for the politics of like women and men, and denying men voices and permission to say, hey, like, men actually go through shit as well. And sure, there's been this imbalance historically, but
in certain contexts,
we're not going to move forward if we push men down.
No.
Right? And so this is veering off a bit from eating disorders, but yeah, the same within an eating disorder context. Like, there are so many men who have eating disorders.
Yes.
So many, but where are their voices? There are not many of them.
I'm like when I'm scrolling through and I'm like choosing things on social media to save, to share, and to talk about later, a whole bunch of them lately have had to do with men.
Yeah.
And I'm like, is this just going to become a men inspirational like account? because I feel so strongly about this.
Yeah.
Because I think that it's actually in some ways unfair.
Yeah. Absolutely.
That the expectation is that men just look a certain way naturally, and that they just feel strong, and they just like have abs, and that's like the male ideal, and well, they should just kind of get on with it.
Yeah.
And there are so few male voices in the eating disorder community speaking about it.
Yeah.
So I'm like,
yeah, it's a problem.
It's an example of, I'm not in that minority group of people that have eating disorders, but I will try my damnedest to elevate those stories and those voices using my own experience and my own platform that I have. In my context, it means that I search for guests that have a voice in that space that can come and talk about it.
Yes.
That's the fucking point.
Amazing.
That's the point of all of this.
Yes.
It's
exactly.
not like, what are we doing here if we aren't doing our best? We can acknowledge disparities, and we can acknowledge ill treatment of all kinds of different groups of people in a variety of contexts. But we can also commit to using the voices that we have to elevate stories that will help other people recover and move forward.
Yes. Amen.
I don't think that those things need to be separate.
I wish more people thought this way.
I mean, maybe they do, and they're just afraid to say it. Right? I think that's kind of a thing.
The fear these days, and even with myself, like with my coaching business, I know that I will step into content creation. And I currently don't feel like I necessarily fit in with the landscape, with the conversation on social media as it stands when it comes to recovery and body image. And so to be my authentic self, like the cancel fear is real. And it shouldn't be, because it silences people who have a lot to offer.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I don't know how to temper that fear for you. All that I can say about that is, what's the alternative to being your authentic self?
Yeah.
I would rather go down truly like living and learning this as I go along. Like, of course, like people are going to make mistakes all over the place when we're talking about this stuff.
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
not everything is going to be bubble wrapped and sensitive. And actually, I think that that's a good thing, because I think that for us, having suffered with eating disorders, to go out into the real world, we're going to have to just face things head on. This isn't something like, if I had a problem with alcohol and then I could just consciously never, ever put myself in a situation with alcohol again, I could feasibly do that. I have an eating disorder. So I'm never going to have that choice, because I'm going to be confronted with food multiple times a day for the rest of my days. And so we need to be realistic about that and the differences between I don't know, our different authentic experiences, and knowing that we will struggle and knowing that people will slip up, because we're not perfect within the eating disorder recovery community. The world is not perfect, and it's not attuned to people who have had eating disorders or who have eating disorders. Yeah. So there's some degree of personal responsibility over your own reactions too when people have discussions about it.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah,
and that's sort of
a good point.
That sort of brings me to, and I've talked about this on an episode separately, but like the idea of trigger warnings. What are your thoughts? I'm curious as to your thoughts on this.
Okay. So with trigger warnings, I feel like, all right. So personal experience here. Back when I was in the heyday of my disordered behaviors, I was obsessed with like what I eat in the day, YouTube videos, what I eat in a day, and what else? Like like hearing about other people's eating disorder experiences, comparing my experience to theirs, like watching this content in a very unhealthy way. There would be trigger warnings for all of it. If there was a trigger warning in front of a video, I'm like, ooh, this is good.
That means it's going to be a good one.
Yes, they're going to get into their behaviors. Perfect. This is what I want. And so I think that trigger warnings are a bit redundant. Like, they don't really work. Who is going to be like, oh yes, I am terribly disordered, and they're going to be speaking about the things that I struggle with, so I'm going to click away.
It's never happened.
People don't do that.
I am convinced that has never fucking happened, because when you are in the depths, you are not aware enough to actually take yourself away from triggers.
Exactly.
There is no fucking way. And I recently saw, and I've seen research to support this, and I talked about it on the episode that I talked about this, but there's an even more recent research paper, which is basically like a meta-analysis of this type of trigger warning research. It's not helpful. It's not helpful. The people that would need it aren't going to use it, and the people that don't need it don't need it.
Yeah, it's the thought that counts, but redundant. And also, there's going to be no trigger warning for when your aunt makes a comment about how much food you're eating at the family get-together. Like, There's no trigger warnings in real life. And like you were saying, when your maladaptive coping mechanism, which you're trying to move past, involves food, it's not like you can just have abstinence of like, okay, well, I just won't go to parties with alcohol. I just won't go anywhere where there's food. Like, no, it's not going to happen.
That's the point. If you avoid everywhere that there's food and there could be comments about food in an effort to not trigger yourself, you're still in your eating disorder.
Yes.
That's the point. We're trying to move past that. We're trying to come out of that to be able to navigate the world in a way that doesn't send us flying backwards. So there's a safe bubble place where when you're in really fragile recovery, you sort of structure your life around getting past that point.
Yeah.
And I think that's important to be aware of that it actually ends up looking a little bit rigid in the interim until you can introduce freedom.
Absolutely.
And that's where, hypothetically, you would need those trigger warnings. But those people that are in that very fragile place, you know that they're still going to go and seek for that. They're going to go look for that content. They love it.
100%.
I would love... I'm willing to be wrong. I'm totally willing to be wrong about this. And I'm sure that there are anecdotes and I'm sure that there are very real experiences that people have had that have been very dedicated to completely avoiding things that are triggering online, for instance. But oh my God, would I be so curious to talk to somebody that's like, oh yeah, totally. I see trigger warnings and I never found them compelling. I'm like, I just don't believe you. I just don't believe you.
No, I wouldn't say I believe that either.
But anyway, what else do we have controversial opinions about?
Oh, well, just about intuitive eating.
Yes.
So I think that intuitive eating is not helpful when you're at the beginning stages of recovery. It's something to aim for, but when you're at the beginning stages of recovery for binge eating or for a restrictive eating disorder, what's intuitive eating? You know, like it's your intuition is going to tell you to do something quite disordered, right? And so for me, it's like you cannot trust your intuition at the beginning of recovery. So that's why I'm a huge supporter of this more regimented way of eating, like mechanical eating, right?
Yes.
Like I'm going to wake up and have breakfast, and I'm going to have a snack, and then I'm going to have lunch, and then I must do these things. That was incredibly helpful to me. Well, I guess just a bit of a history of my disordered behaviors. It kind of, I identify strongly with both restrictive eating disorders and binge purge types of eating disorders, and which I'm grateful for. Like, I feel like I can see both sides of that. Again,
you've gotten really good at this whole thank your eating disorder thing.
Gratitude.
I'm super grateful that I've had a multitude of eating disorders.
I'm super grateful that I have experienced the whole gamut of eating disorders. But truly, I kind of cycled back and forth between, restriction, binge purge. I know what a binge feels like. And I also know what restriction feels like. So back and forth. And for me, it was incredibly helpful for both of those sides of my eating disorder to have something more regimented. And you need to have that regiment to get rid of you need to have the rigidity to get rid of the rigidity so that you can eat intuitively. And you have to go through that process. So encouraging somebody with an eating disorder to eat intuitively, it's like, they're going to have to, there's steps before that.
I agree. And this is interesting. And this is maybe another kind of controversial opinion, that this idea of all in recovery that I've seen over the past several years of just people that are just like, I'm just not doing eating disorder anymore. It's off, turning it off. I'm just going to eat completely freely, no matter what I want. I'm not going to like blah, blah, blah.
Like Stephanie Buttermore?
Yes. Yeah. That whole idea.
Yeah.
And I've seen this kind of pervasively throughout the sort of social media eating disorder recovery thing.
That was so interesting when she did that.
It was an absolute... You know what I wish about that? Maybe this is a controversial opinion. I wish that she had named I wish that she had named that it was an eating disorder.
Right. Yeah.
She was kind of like, oh, I just had extreme hunger, and I was sort of like...
I've had the exact same thoughts about her.
Yeah.
Like she was in figure competitions.
Yep.
Ooh, which is a whole other podcast episode.
That's going to be a whole nother podcast.
Can you be into figure competitions, bodybuilding, that aesthetic, while not being disordered?
No.
I don't think you can.
No, the answer is no. I would die on that hill. It is a prescribed eating disorder.
Yeah.
No matter whether it takes hold for the rest of your life and you manage to keep it within some finite period of time, you have fucked parts of yourself forever by engaging in that. I will die on that hill.
Asterisk to when we were talking about fitness before, this does not include figure competitions.
Oh my God, it doesn't.
It's not fitness. That is not fitness. That is disordered.
It's no different than being like runway models or Victoria's Secret models that have to only have liquids for 10 days before the show. Yeah. Like, it's worse than that. Like it's prescribed eating disorder behavior, and I will die on that hill. I'm not interested. But anyways, that was what sort of Stephanie Buttermore had been doing.
Right. Yeah.
Which led her into this
disorder.
Like, it's completely an eating disorder.
Yeah.
And then she would have these massive cheat days, and she would film it, and it was like these massive quantities of food, and then she would be so restrictive in order to keep her figure. And then she went, quote unquote, all in. Mm-hmm. And this was this sort of revolution on social media, because she just basically took the handbrake off and just ate whatever she wanted for months and months and months. Now, granted, she also continued to vigorously work out throughout her entire kind of like all-in experience. Like, she continued to go to the gym all of the time.
Yeah.
But she never once, in all of the time that she's talked about it, she's never once said that it was disordered eating or that it was an eating disorder. She was always kind of like, oh, I ended up having extreme hunger and I was just trying to balance out my hunger cues. And I thought that that was such a missed opportunity for anybody that struggled with an eating disorder, knowing how big her platform is and that she was going all in and literally recovering from an eating disorder. Mm-hmm. For her to name it would have been very, I think, validating for the people that follow her.
Well, to her credit, like there's a lot of what she was experiencing, which of course like is textbook, like disordered eating. So I feel like a lot of her audience who also have disordered eating or eating disorders, like they connected with that. Mm-hmm. And so she didn't necessarily have to name it in order for it to be of benefit to her subscribers, because I see comments on her videos all the time like, you're someone who encouraged me to start recovery and stuff. And so I don't feel like it discouraged any of her followers, but yeah, I wish that too, that she had been more open about what it actually, like it wasn't just extreme hunger, like those are like just,
name it, you know, like name it. But I totally agree with you that I actually found her all in journey. I actually found that quite helpful to see tangentially, just to see like, oh, this is sort of like the phases that she went through. Yeah. Here, I found the physiology of it really interesting because she's also a scientist. Yeah. So I did think it was really interesting and I thought it was very beneficial. I really would have loved to have her just kind of name it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. But the all-in idea itself, I think is quite unrealistic for the majority of people that have eating disorders.
Yeah, and it would require a lot of support from therapists, from, you know, mentors. It would dietitians, like it would require, and I feel like she had that. Yeah. I feel like she had a lot, like a team of people who are helping her as she did this.
Yeah. And a lot of accountability, being that she was doing it so publicly online. So it was almost like it would have been more difficult for her to hide anything else.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But back to intuitive eating, and how it's pushed on social media, not helpful until you're at a certain point of recovery, so that you actually have a clear intuition about what your body is asking for, and you don't confuse your intuition with a disorder, because there are parts early on in recovery where the disordered voice is simply too loud to actually hear your intuition. You cannot trust that. You have to be regimented in order to not be regimented.
Oh, I totally agree. I think I've mentioned this before on the podcast where like the meal plan is a gift, and even getting to the point where you're on like a really good meal plan that's substantial enough and nourishing enough, that takes time. Mm-hmm. So stay there in order to then sort of build in little pieces of flexibility over time as you kind of come to them. I think that's really important, that people don't think like, I just have to know my body and feel it in my body, when your body hasn't known a hunger cue because you've been suppressing it for whatever number of years. And it's like, you wouldn't know a hunger cue if it hit you in the face. Like, we're not ready for intuition just yet.
No, absolutely not. That's a few steps ahead. Yeah. Right. It's just like, oh, self-love.
It's like skipping to self-love.
No, you're going to learn it along the process. Like, it's going to come. It's just, you can't skip ahead.
Yeah, totally.
Yes.
All right. I have a question for you.
Okay.
It's about harm reduction.
Harm reduction.
And I think this might be one where I have somebody on that is a big proponent of this, and I almost frame it as a debate because I think it's a controversial opinion maybe that I have about it. I don't think that it's helpful. The idea of proposing it as the solution, I find could create the feelings of hopelessness. And here I will back up and I will sort of describe how I have had harm reduction explained to me and how it's been explained to me as a client, where essentially I went into the eating disorder program and they tell you when you go in, you know, what these different levels of support are. And it's anywhere from sort of inpatient, you know, hospitalization to sort of in and out, where you go for meal support, you go home at night, or you go all the way in the day and then you come home, or you do things outpatient where you live at home, but you go for appointments, etc. But then they also have a program that's kind of called harm reduction. And I don't know what exactly they call it in the program, but it's essentially like we've sort of decided that we're just living with our eating disorder now forever.
I have heard of this program.
And what we're going to do is just make your life more comfortable in maintaining your eating disorder and reduce harm. So keep you quote unquote safe, as if there's a safe level of an eating disorder. And then we're just going to kind of like support you through that. Yikes. And I had a guest on and we talked about this because she integrates this into her practice. Okay. And I was like, okay, let's talk about this, because when this was presented to me, what I can tell you is that I felt hopeless. Mm-hmm. I felt beyond help. And it was like they were framing it as, well, you're chronic and terminal.
That's what I was going to say. Yeah. So they're basically saying that you have a terminal mental illness.
Like you're treatment resistant.
Yeah.
And so rather than I'm just saying how it felt. Rather than put additional resources towards actually trying to help you get better, we're just going to kind of help you maintain.
Yeah, like you're going to be in this quasi state of hell because you are a special person who can't achieve full recovery.
Yeah.
Other people can, but you can't. Okay, I can't even get started on how disturbing to me that's even presented as a treatment option. Like, because I feel like that is a fundamental belief that so many people with eating disorders have, is like, okay, well, other people can recover, but I obviously can't recover. Like, I'm the anomaly. I'm too fucked up to recover. And that is a lie that the eating disorder tells you. Like, that is your eating disorder telling you that because I thought that for years and years and years, but like, I recovered.
Yeah.
If I can, you can. And so to me, that whole treatment approach is validating the voice of the eating disorder, telling you that you are special and you are too fucked up to get better, right? So that is very disturbing to me that even exists.
So when I kind of put this forward to the guests and people who have been listening sort of in order will have already reached that point. The way that she described it as integrating it is more of a, well, I don't turn down clients, so I meet them where they're at. And if they're not ready to make change, I can still support them in the way that I can without them actually needing to feel like they need to make moves. And in principle, to meet someone where they're at with their eating disorder when you're a clinician, absolutely 100% without a doubt.
Yeah.
Not everybody is ready to make change right away.
Yeah.
If you are introducing this as, we will hold your hand and we will hold space for you here until you're ready to make change, absolutely.
Yeah.
But to me, that's different than just staying there. The intention always has to be recovery. The intention, your North Star guiding you when you're interacting with a client or treatment, can't be, we just keep you chronically comfortable in your eating disorder. I just think there has to be an intention. There
Absolutely.
has to be a direction.
Like, why go to therapy if it's going to be symptom management? Like, why I would not even bother going. It's like, okay, I'm going to be in this quasi state of recovery for the rest of my life. I am labeled as such and put in a special program for it. Like, I'm just going to go give up.
Either that, or I'm just going to keep going and feel very valid that I'm like in eating disorder recovery because I never have to make any change. And I just keep going back because I'm chronic and this is just like the way that I exist. Like, I'm curious as to who that's helping if we don't frame it as, but we're eventually moving this direction.
Absolutely. Like, I don't understand why therapists can't hold space for their clients, meet them where they're at, and then walk alongside with them until they are ready to start making some changes. Like, I don't understand why that is just part of regular therapy. Why does it need to be a specific program?
Like, why do we have to call it harm reduction? I think that's my point too, is that the people that are using it, I think they're actually using it as that, hopefully, right? That they're actually entering the client therapist relationship saying, you know, we have the intention to eventually move this along. I just really want to meet you where you're at and keep you safe in the meantime. Yeah. Then why do we have to call it harm reduction and to give it this sort of management of your life with the eating disorder label?
To me, that's enabling a lot of what keeps people stuck in the first place. Like it's enabling this belief that other people can recover, but you can't, and that your eating disorder is especially bad, and that's why you can't fully recover. Like it's enabling a lot of these beliefs that people use to hang on to bits and pieces of their eating disorder, right? To me, it's just, it's enabling, and I think it is actually harmful. Like, and
the irony of harm
so,
reduction.
Yeah, and I'm so open to understanding this. Like, I would actually love to go back and listen to that conversation, because I'm very open to understanding how that could be harm reduction. I'm so curious. But from my personal perspective, like, what the fuck is that? Like,
right, yeah.
No, thank you. If I was put in that group, I would feel like giving up.
I was
very detrimental.
I was shocked by how much it impacted me, not just in that moment that it was presented to me as an option, but it imprinted something on me as well that I continued to carry then into my actual therapy with my therapist. And I was like, this is what they've told me, that this is like, and I started describing myself as treatment resistant and chronic, and
Yikes.
And that changed the way that I thought about my recovery at that point.
Yeah.
I think that's not good, because if I hadn't had the other support that I had at the time to negate those thoughts that I was beyond help, I don't know what I could have pulled from
exactly.
that. So,
well, and to me, it shouldn't be an unpopular opinion that recovery is possible. Like this, I don't want this to be an unpopular opinion. I didn't think that was an unpopular opinion, but apparently...
Or controversial in any way.
No, but apparently if this program exists, then maybe it is a controversial opinion to some therapists. Like, absolutely not. I do not agree with that whatsoever.
So I really, all of this asterisk with... I seek to learn more about the reason behind the existence of this.
Yeah,
I would love to have a further conversation about it from what I've experienced myself and what I've come to learn and know and read about. I think it's potentially really missing the mark.
Yeah. Especially when you're labeled as such and put in a separate group. Just like have the therapist understand that they're meeting their client where they're at and go from there. Why does there need to be an actual labeling of you as treatment resistant and put in a special group? Like, talk about feeling like you are
the exception,
right? Yeah.
Our brains already do that. We definitely don't need to reinforce that, but
absolutely not.
All right. I don't know if I have any other controversial, these seem to be all of my controversial or unpopular eating disorder opinions. I'm sure I've got more somewhere, but
no, this is great. I feel like we towed our way into the shallow end of some very controversial things, which we might get into in later podcast episodes. But yes, if you are currently in recovery, I know how shitty it is, and it's okay if it's completely shitty. And if you're wildly uncomfortable, you're doing it right. And both things can be true at the same time. You're making the right decision for yourself, but it also might feel so wrong at some point, at some parts of your journey. So, and that's what I'm all about, is just being honest about it, right?
Isn't that it?
And it sucks that honesty has to equate to the unpopular opinions of what just the reality of things. And the more we can be blunt and honest, the more we can truly connect. And connection and community is what creates healing.
Yeah.
So the more honesty, the more people are willing to be vulnerable, the more connections that are created, the more healing that happens. So let's not stop talking about things that people don't want to talk about, because that's where the gold is, right?
Like, recover loudly, heal loudly.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what's going to be an absolute game changer for you in your coaching practice and when you're having clients, what is going to be insane is that the more that we sort of talk around these things and make a bunch of fluff around it, it's more frustrating as a person going through it.
Yeah.
I've always craved truth and just someone to give it to me straight. Like, what are the realities of what we're dealing with here? I think that's going to be a differentiator with
and
you.
Like the non-bullshit approach.
Yes.
Right? And because people with eating disorders, like, we're smart.
Yeah.
High functioning, there have actually been studies done that show high functioning people struggle with eating disorders. And and there's a real bullshit detector there. And I feel like that's why a lot of people can get so frustrated, whether they're considering going into recovery or if they're in recovery, is that there is a lot of fluff surrounding everything, and they sense that. And the more real we can be, the closer we can get to the truth at all times, the better when it comes to connection.
Yeah, a beautiful sentiment. And so on that note, I want to make sure that we know where to find you.
Yes, on Instagram, of course. Very millennial of me. What's TikTok?
Oh my God. I have this fear that I'm going to have to start doing like reels and TikTok in order to even grow. I know.
Okay, reels. We can do reels together. TikTok, I'm too millennial for that at this point.
I'm like, I don't know any other, like, you know, when you're thinking about promotion and marketing things, I'm like, video is the way, which just means I'm going to have to.
Or a YouTube channel.
Oh my God. Who has time? Okay. Anyway. Okay. We can find you on Instagram.
On Instagram. Yes. My username will be in the show notes, I guess. Yeah. If you have a story you want to share with me, if you want a listening ear to what you're going through, seriously, message me. I love hearing other people's stories. And yeah, it's so important to me that people are given voices in what they're experiencing. And if I can be a conduit or a witness to these stories, I am so honored. My coaching business called Flourish is soon to be up and running, or it might be as when this is released. So if you are looking for some empathy, some motivation, in between your therapy sessions and eating disorder recovery, hit me up. I would love to work with you. And yeah, it was so great to like record these conversations, because Maddie and I have these conversations at all times. Like we could probably make a 10-hour podcast episode if we wanted to.
We probably could. And I have a feeling that you'll be back on for another round of this.
Yes,
because
I would love to be.
There's so much to unpack. Well, Sophie, it has been an absolute dream to have you as my first in-person interview.
Oh my goodness.
Sitting across from me at my table. So what a dream. And thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm just so grateful for you. And yeah, you're amazing, Maddie.
Love you.
Love you too.